Can the European Union survive another Trump presidency? No, that's not an exaggeration. From trade wars to NATO spats, Trump's first term was anything but unconventional diplomacy. He called the EU a foe, openly criticized their trade practices, and treated NATO like an overpriced gym membership he didn't want to renew. Now, as second term looms, EU leaders are scrambling to recalibrate their strategies. French President Emmanuel Macron has even suggested the idea of Europe's strategic autonomy. But let's not jump to conclusions just yet. Trump's first term taught the EU some hard lessons they might not forget so easily. Remember when he slapped tariffs on European steel and aluminum, claiming it was a matter of national security? Apparently, Italian pasta and German car parts were existential threats to US defense. The EU fired back with its own tariffs, targeting iconic American products like Harley-Davidson motorcycles, Levi's jeans, and even Kentucky bourbon. Bourbon exports alone dropped by 37% during that trade spat, a major blow to an iconic industry. But Trump's protectionist policies went beyond bourbon barrels. German car makers like BMW and Volkswagen, which export millions of vehicles to the US annually, found themselves in his crosshairs. If Trump follows through on his threats to impose tariffs on European cars, the fallout could cost the EU billions. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, such tariffs could reduce EU car exports by 50%. Trump's America First agenda has already disrupted global trade in everything from soybeans to wine. A new trade war could hit European farmers hard, particularly in France, Spain, and Italy, which rely heavily on exports to the US. Anticipating this, the EU has been working to diversify its trade relationships with Japan, Canada, and even Vietnam. In fact, the EU-Japan trade deal, dubbed the Cars for Cheese Agreement, created one of the largest free trade areas in the world. In 2021 alone, EU-China trade surpassed EU-US trade for the first time, reaching 696 billion euros. So if Trump reignites a trade war, the EU might simply pivot further east. Okay, trade wars are one thing, but let's not forget defense alliances. During his first term, Trump famously scolded NATO members for not spending enough on defense. He demanded they meet the 2% GDP defense spending target, accusing allies of freeloading on America's military might. And to be fair, he wasn't entirely wrong. Back in 2016, only 5 out of NATO's members hit that 2% target. By 2020, that number had risen to 10. But Trump isn't done yet. Sources suggest that his team has already told European officials that the US president wants NATO members to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP. Speaking of defense, there's one issue that looms even larger: Ukraine. For the EU, supporting Ukraine against Russia has become a defining mission. Since the war began, the EU has provided over 50 billion euros in assistance, from weapons to humanitarian aid. Trump's stance on Russia, however, has always been, well, complicated. During his previous term, he froze nearly $400 million in military aid to Ukraine, while allegedly pressuring President Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden and his son Hunter, a favor that would later lead to his first impeachment trial. His relationship with Vladimir Putin also raised eyebrows, with critics accusing him of being overly accommodating to Moscow's agenda. Some fear he could take a backseat on Ukraine, or worse, try to strike a deal with Putin, arguing it's time to prioritize US interests. Such a move would leave the EU scrambling to fill the gap, both militarily and financially. A divided US and EU would be a dream scenario for Putin. With transatlantic ties weakened, Moscow could seize the moment to push boundaries in Ukraine and beyond. So with all these challenges on the horizon, trade wars, defense disputes, and ideological clashes, how is the EU preparing? The answer lies in resilience. The EU isn't just waiting for Trump's next move. They're actively strengthening its defenses as we discussed today. But can they pull it off? Because resilience doesn't mean invincibility. The EU remains deeply intertwined with the US economically, militarily, and politically. A sudden shift in American policy would be a bad scenario for Europe, testing its unity in ways it hasn't faced before. That said, the EU is better prepared than it was in 2016, having learned hard lessons from Trump's first term. However, internal challenges like rising populism, economic inequality, and migration pressures continue to expose fault lines in its unity. And that's a wrap. Do you think the EU will rise to the challenge using the lessons of the past? Or could this be the start of a new geopolitical era where divisions widen and alliances falter? And how do you think Russia and China factor into this mix? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Before you go, Don't forget to check out our recent video. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and press the bell icon, and I'll see you next time.